today. So welcome, first of all. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. How can air quality be improved in the UK, and what initiatives are underway and what further action is needed? It's great to have you all along and hopefully participate in a lively discussion and Q&A towards the end, but as importantly, listen to our experts in the room today. My name is Chris Rush. I'm a director at a building services consultancy called Hawley. I'm also the chair of the professional body for air quality in the UK, the Institute of Air Quality Management. And I'm pretty much air quality mad. I get involved with lots of air quality side initiatives and working groups as well. So really passionate about the topic. So I'm really honoured to be asked to chair today and to be able to listen in and support such great speakers which we have in the room. And we're here to really explore some of the real sort of practical solutions around reducing emissions and how we want to move forward to improve air quality. What has been done? What could be done? How can we monitor the impact of any improvements made and any effects there, really? And hopefully that's what today's presenters will be able to start to open up and tease on. I'm joined by 4 experts in their field, each of which I'll introduce before their individual session to speak, so their details are fresh in your mind. What I won't be doing is repeating verbatim each of their bios. All that detail is available and will be followed up after this webinar, and you can look into and I'm sure approach each of the presenters separately as needed on that front. But I'll give a little bit of an overview. Before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded, which is fantastic. So it will be shared after today's event, not just with yourselves who've joined, but also those who signed up and haven't been able to join today for whatever reason. We'll also be making some slides available, I'm sure, with permission of the speakers. And like I said, I'm sure our speakers today will be open to being approached, possibly to answer any questions that we might not be able to cover off today, in case that conversations spill out. Format wise, what we'll be doing after I've given this sort of brief introduction, I'll be passing on to each of our speakers in turn. What we'll have is a 10-minute piece where each of them get to speak and present either about a particular focus area or it might be a particular case study that they're able to share. Following that, what we'll do is have a Q&A session. So with that being said, if you can please save any questions that you might have until that part of today's webinar. However, more than happy for you to place them in the Q&A chat while the presentations are happening. It's just in terms of answering those questions, we'll have to wait until the Q&A session at the end. But by all means, if you have a question that comes to mind during the presentation, please add it to the Q&A chat so we capture it, just in case that thought disappears, which sometimes they can do, which we've all had before. Without any further ado, and to keep things moving forward, I'd like to welcome Srinivas Srimath, who is our first speaker for today. Oh, sorry, Max will be our first speaker for today. Max Nankaro from AECOM. I'm jumping ahead a little bit in the agenda here. So I'd like to welcome Max. Max is an Associate Director and Chartered Scientist with, not going to say too many years, but quite a few years in the air quality industry. Working on a range of different types of projects through different engagement with frameworks and consultancy projects. Ambient air quality assessments in the UK have been a large piece of Max's profile. I'm obviously hugely impressed that he's a member of the Institute of Air Quality Management as well, so that gets a big tick in the box. And being engaged around the regulatory landscape of air quality in the UK is something that is particularly pertinent to this conversation today. So really looking forward to Max's perspective there. So Max, if I pass across to yourself and you're able to share your slides, I'll mute at my end, but I'll keep my video on in case. But over to you.
Thanks, Chris. Hopefully everyone can see and hear me. As Chris said, I'm Max Nankaro. Thanks, Chris. Associate Director at AECOM. Firstly, I'd like to thank WCC for the opportunity to speak to you all today. I'm really excited to be here. In my role, I spend a lot of time thinking about the macro scale of air quality policy as a driver for action. So I wanted to start today's discussion talking about that. Today's topic is such a broad one though, and it can be looked at in a number of different angles. 10 minutes, to be honest, is nowhere near enough time to cover that. So I did what many a modern consultant will be doing when faced with such a big question. I asked AI. So what does AI think? First, I asked it how to solve a problem, which is ultimately what we're trying to achieve here. It came up with a good process flow diagram seen here on the right. The eagle-eyed among you will notice a few problems with the diagram, but the issues with AI and image generation are for another day. In the UK, certainly, for some pollutants, I would argue we are somewhere here on the process, in that we are trying to learn about the steps we've taken already and moving into identifying what comes next. So then I also asked AI, what are the top 10 actions to improve air quality? It gave quite a good list there from my perspective, things that many of us will be familiar with having worked on it or studied these aspects. I wanted to focus though on number 3 there. So it's a popular and well-known topic, low emission zones and congestion zones, but is still an important driver for change in the UK. So NO2 plans and clean air zones. There are currently 7 live clean air zones through the government NO2 plans, and a few more locally driven ones there. I put a note there to say that probably would have been more without the impact of COVID, but that's a bit of a what if story from history. The 2 maps there show really where these are distributed spatially, and understandably these are centered around large cities in the UK. There's various different levels of clean air zones as well, again, as I'm sure we're all aware, and these have been in place for a varying degree of time. Those weren't cheap. There's some conjecture around this, but if you look at the official reporting, which I've linked at the top there, the initial JACU budget up to the end of 2022 was somewhere in the region of 880 million. And even to this day, they're still spending money in the financial year 24 to 25. So the big question is have they been effective? And at this point in time, we can look at the data to see whether that has been the case. And again, according to their data, you would have to say yes. I've linked a couple of reports here which are useful to look at. Firstly, the Environmental Improvement Plan Progress Report, which came out just last week, which is the source of the graph on the left. It's fairly self-explanatory, I'm sure, for most people in this call, but you can see a clear downward trend there, of which I would argue clean air zones have been quite a key contributor in local roadside NO2. The graph on the right there as well is the best one I think I've seen, demonstrating the impact of, well, in this case, the ultra low emission zone. And you can see there the varying degrees of spatial impact in central London, inner London, outer London. And they've also shown the impacts around about 5 kilometres from the GLA boundary, which is more or less where I live. So I was quite interested in that bottom one. And there you can just see the step changes most dramatically in central London, obviously. But it does show some impacts of those clean air zones and the ULEZ in London moving forward through time. The dotted line is the projected one, obviously. So again, as many of you know in the room, I'm sure that can be open to interpretation. But I think that's, as I said, one of the best graphs that I've seen to clearly demonstrate the impact of these things. Another indicator which I spend a lot of my time thinking about and working in is a local air quality management, so AQMAs. Have these been a help or a hindrance? The graph on the left-hand side here demonstrates AQMA revocations by numbers over the years. And, you know, obviously there you can see a big uptick on the right-hand side in the most recent couple of years. There's a few mitigating factors for this, notably DEFRA have been pushing these much harder in the last couple of years. So many of the AQMAs that have been revoked in the last couple of years may have been compliant for a long time, just haven't been revoked. But overall, I think this graph is one that shows that AQMAs and more broadly LAQM has been broadly successful in the last few years, certainly at achieving improvement at a local level. We anticipate this will continue over the next couple of years as well, because most AQMAs are only a couple of years away from achieving the compliance required to achieve revocation. So whilst this is a good news story overall, I think this draws the next question, the next logical question anyway, which I hope is the topic for discussion today, is that what comes next? What do we do once we've achieved compliance or revocations in this case? How do we continue to improve? So I've entitled this slide One Step Beyond. So what do we do next? Can and should the UK government move to stronger legislation to continue the recent good work? We've obviously seen new targets for PM2.5 in recent years, which is a good start, but I would argue that more regulation is needed for NO2. We've obviously seen our European neighbours move towards this in the last year or so, looking at 20 micrograms per cubic metre as a new target and regulating that at a national level, which we could do via the EIP and OEP. I think another point of interest is that local policymakers, we are seeing more and more, are recognising this themselves and are moving ahead of national government in this sphere, setting themselves local targets via their new or recently updated air quality strategies. I've just linked a few on the right-hand side there, but I'm sure there's more examples that I'm not aware of. Most of these are setting a target of 30 micrograms by 2030, but Oxford City Council at the bottom there was a trailblazer in this respect, so is aiming to achieve that this year. These are obviously, though, aspirational, and are there any penalties for not meeting these? I think one thing to think about with clean air zones is that most of these were driven, at least initially, by EU infringement proceedings. So will we see that same process play out where aspirational targets are or aren't met? So that's just the topic I wanted to introduce for today's discussion. There's obviously lots to talk about around that, but if anyone has any questions, we can address those at the bottom, but that's my slide. Thanks. Back to you, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks, Max. That was, really interesting. Lots to ask. I'm going to try to hold back asking any questions immediately, otherwise I go against everything I said at the start. So thank you for that. What we'll do is we'll move quickly on, and like Max said, please do add any questions into the Q&A, or by all means sort of save them up towards the end. It's always nice to have a bit of a heads up if you haven't got any questions now. So I'll introduce Srinivas Srimath. Again, I'll give a bit of a sort of a brief summary for bio here and for some context. Director in Air Quality and Permitting at RSK, a fantastic breadth of professional memberships. Again, tick the box of the IQM, which is great. So I don't get my bonus there, but I definitely get a moral victory that we've got some fantastic people as part of the institute. Working across a lot of various topics in environmental and particularly air quality consultancy, and I'm sort of very pleased to share around your focus being developing integrated sustainable mitigation strategies to minimise the impacts of pollution and air pollution, which is again absolutely fantastic, and that's where we need to be moving to, is how can we improve things, looking at emerging technologies and bringing technology to bear, really. So fantastic to have you on board, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Hope you can see the screen.
Yep, that's fine. That's sharing. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, and you can hear as well.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Chris, and good morning all. First of all, thanks to Waterfront for this opportunity to share my thoughts, and to you all participants and audience for taking time. So air pollution, we all know, air pollution kills and leads to lots of diseases, is all established. No need to really go in any great detail. And World Health Organization in 2021 have published tightened air quality guidelines, and interim targets are also provided to gradually achieve the final guidelines. And as Max said, we are not really there, but UK is trying a lot on that one. Key pollutants to local air quality management, as an intro, is in terms of nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter, and other pollutants. These are all defined in the air quality strategy And other pollutants are also relevant, which are emerging, like ammonia, microplastics, or nanoplastics. And these volatile organic compounds, several varieties of them. Several initiatives are already in place. MAX has listed clear range zones and then ultra low emission zones. Pretty successful in London, I would say. And in Brighton, there is bus ELEZ. And then clean energy and charging infrastructure, Great Britain Energy Initiative, and rapid charging systems have come up, and vehicle equipment and emission improvements, and so on. Euro 6, Euro Stage 4 for non-road mobile machinery, and ban of, as you know, sale of new petrol and diesel cars by 2035. And a lot of emphasis is on renewable energy like hydrogen, and the solar and wind farm and so on. We are certainly working on several of these renewable projects, solar, wind farm, onshore, offshore, and so on. And then public awareness campaigns, as you know, a lot of funding is released, and grants are available, particularly to change the behavior, to educate people about domestic wood burning, oil burning, and schemes like the School Streets Initiative, Breathe London, to say a few. It is not possible to list all of them, but there are several of them. And building and development controls by the local authorities and the environment agency in the respective countries, they worked very well in the sense that planning conditions are attached to every permission, and similarly permitting conditions, and a lot of emphasis is going on in mitigation. And charge points are specified usually, as you see, in planning conditions, and emphasis on green infrastructure is also there. Planning policies and strategy, active travel, public transport improvements, and aviation strategy, maritime plan, you name them. So many of them are going on. And innovation-wise, you have artificial intelligence, drones, and self-driving cars, particularly the battery ones. So they're also very picking up. And regarding policy, some HAY project mainly aimed at this air quality monitoring at schools, ventilation upgrades, like funding for ventilation upgrades, air cleaning technology like using of HEPA filters, smoke control areas. These are the ones. And the research-wise, clean air strategy is not a research one. However, I listed there because it emphasizes control of various pollutants, and cross-departmental working groups, like between different working groups, like different departments, how they can work in together, like a joint edge approach, because it's not like one department tackles this. Is a coherent way of working together. And the NICE guidelines mainly for homes. I will come to a particular study RSK have done with ADAS. ADAS is Agricultural Development Advisory Service. It is one of the RSK companies working on agricultural emissions reduction and advising stakeholders, various farmers, and other interested in reducing agricultural emissions. So one project funded by DEFRA is on slurry acidification. So this was done at 6 sites, selected sites. And as you see on the right-hand side, there is a great reduction in ammonia emissions when the slurry is acidified. This is all published and available online. And slurry cooling is another project which RSK ADAS have done. With the cooling of the slurry, you can achieve good reduction in ammonia, as you see on the right-hand side. So what are the next steps? So obviously the World Health Organization air quality guidelines are, as we discussed, are not really achieved. However, there are interim targets are there, so we are working towards that. And then EV access should be extended to rural and low-income areas, stronger collaboration between national and local governments, and as we discuss a lot of public awareness and behavioral change is important. So that's more probably work needs to be done on that. And public health initiatives to prioritize areas with vulnerable populations who are exposed to high level of pollution. So that should be focused. There is a slide I tried to put in this at the end to show the air quality focus areas. Particularly, that's the initiative in London. So what to ensure is mandate policies rather than voluntarily coming up and doing it. Policy should be in place, coordinate across various sectors, and joined as approach kind of thing, and then engage communities in local solutions. And particularly, the air quality data is available. However, more can be done in making access more easily available and so on. Different other pollutants as well. PM 2.5, particulate matter, particularly the number concentrations, and other pollutants like ammonia, those are still very limited actually. So this is the one I was talking about, air quality focus areas. This particular one is from Mayor of London. It is a superimposed image, air quality focus areas, and as you see the yellow boxes overlaid on the colored map, which shows the income deprivation areas. So as you see, a lot of focus is required in those areas, and probably this initiative can be extended to other cities as well. And finally, microplastics. Sorry for this. Microplastics and nanoparticles in air. They are very present everywhere. It is mainly from water pollution and soil pollution point of view. However, through inhalation as well, that is recognized as a danger to humans. A study I cited here, 3,000 studies were they confined, and then they said that it can cause infertility problems and so on. So several challenges are there, like sampling, analysis, and mitigation. Lack of standardization in terms of methods how you sample them, and the contamination leaks. If you are using plastic containers for sampling collections, it is difficult to sample them, right? And analysis also, there are different. It is very difficult to distinguish between microplastics and nanoparticles from other airborne particles. And mitigation-wise, there are several sources and limiting regulations as well. So we need to focus on more on that one. So with that, I will stop here and take any of your questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Srinivas. That was fantastic, and yeah, there will be lots of questions, and that's quite a timely reminder. Please do pop any questions in the Q&A function there again while they're fresh, and we'll pick those up at the session at the end. But yeah, I've been scribbling lots down, so yeah, lots to follow up on. Thank you. What we'll do now is move on to our next presenter, Stephen Stratton, Principal Consultant Air Quality at Ricardo. Stephen has a fantastic background and an extensive background in air quality monitoring and measurement, looking at verification, validation of air quality data, and ratification of the processes as well. He has masses of experience using low-cost air quality sensing systems, which I'm sure a number of us on this call are getting increased exposure to, and looking at the data from that, and really seeing how best we can integrate that as part of our work. Really, I think it's exceptionally important if we're going to look at how we can improve air quality and move things forward. We need to be able to measure it, and measure it accurately. So fantastic to have Stephen here, and look forward to hearing your presentation. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Chris. Can everybody hear me and see my slides?
Yep, they're coming through. Thanks.
Perfect. Right, like Chris said, my specialty is measurements. So hence why I've repeated measurements 3 times right at the beginning. I'm mad about measurements. So I'll talk a bit about measurements, and then I'll go through a perspective, a Scottish perspective in terms of, or underpinned by measurements, and then sum up at the end what changes to monitoring, for example, we need to look at to ensure we continue to improve air quality. So what's the context around it? What we're looking to do is to achieve limit values or achieve the objectives that's set in legislation. So in this table here, I've stuck in objectives from Scotland. So Scotland has a set of objectives that are slightly different to the rest of the UK. So for example, the PM10 annual mean is 18 instead of 40 micrograms. And the daily objective is 7 exceedances of 50 instead of 35. That's an example of the difference. I've also stuck the new EU limit values, all color-coded, whether they're the same as, less, or more than the Scottish objectives. And then I've stuck in the WHO guideline values as well, which is a whole other step change level decrease in pollution levels, concentration levels. So how do we know whether we're achieving these objectives? We need measurements. And the key here is high quality. That's a key phrase. We need high quality measurements to ensure that we can compare directly to these objectives. And what do I mean by high quality? I mean that the measurements need to be comparable. We need to use common methods. We need to make sure that we're meeting well-defined data quality objectives. And only then can we compare directly to the limit values and disseminate to the wider public with any sort of confidence. So quick on the methodology for what we've done, for what I've done for this presentation. And just a shout out to my colleague, Jack Davison, who did all of this analysis. He's an R and data expert within Ricardo. So within Scotland, we have the Scottish Air Quality Database, which was set up in 2006, which brought together the national automatic and urban rural network sites together with local air quality management sites. We harmonised the QA/QC, quality assurance, quality control, for the whole network, which means now we can compare concentrations in Edinburgh to concentrations in London to concentrations in the south of Italy, for example. So Jack used these data from 2024 to compare to the Scottish, the EU, and the WHO guideline levels. And this chart here just summarises the objective levels and whether sites exceeded these levels during, or these limits during 2024. So if you look at CO and SO2, there's no issue with SO2 and CO in Scotland, and this is generally the same throughout the UK. So there's no exceedances of any of the limit values or guideline limits. For PM10, again, we're doing pretty well in Scotland. There was one exceedance, I don't know if you can see that, but it's one site in Scotland that exceeded the 24-hour objective for Scotland and the WHO guideline level. But we know why this is, and that was down to construction works in the surrounding area of the monitoring site. So we'll be aware we stick in a monitoring site, years later there's construction, and then you end up with an exceedance like this. So it's likely during 2025 that exceedance will disappear. PM10 will be fine in Scotland. For PM2.5 and NO2, it's a slightly different story. So if we're looking at the new 24-hour limit for NO2 for the EU, we'll start to see that the highest sites in Scotland might exceed that if we were to put it in place. And the annual mean is a bit harder to achieve for NO2, the EU NO2 level. So we see an increase in exceedances there. For PM2.5 and NO2, if we're looking at putting in place the WHO guideline levels, then we'd be exceeding that in many sites across Scotland. So a little bit of look at NO2 trends, and it's good this sort of agrees with Max's charts at the beginning. So we see a decrease in NO2 concentrations throughout the years, well, from around 2012, and then see the obligatory step change in 2020 during COVID. Concentrations never or haven't recovered, if that's the right word, since 2020. And that might be due to a number of reasons. So the decrease will be due, like what has been discussed before, local air quality management regime, overarching Clean Air for Scotland strategy, fleet turnover, etc. But in recent years, there's been an implementation of low emission zones in Scotland, so that may have contributed to concentrations not recovering. Plus, we have the behaviour change that took place following COVID, so not as many people are going into work within the urban settings or staying at home now, for example. So all the concentrations have gone below the Scottish objectives, but we can still see they're still above the EU and WHO guideline levels. So a bit about dissemination. So from the previous slides, we say, well, job done, everything's fine. And this is a typical view of the Air Quality in Scotland website on the right here. So every day, all 99 sites are green. That's quite a difficult message to get across when you have WHO guidelines are saying these wouldn't be green. We have the daily air quality index that is mirrored with the current limit values. So we need to maybe think about how to maybe change that in future. Typical episodes we see, so we'll see this map change colour every so often. So in spring for PM 2.5, for example, due to secondary formation, due to agricultural impacts in domestically in Europe. We'll see ozone episodes during the summer. So this is an example of yesterday, the forecast for moderate ozone in the north of Scotland. I did check, so Shetland did turn moderate, and then other sites were just a smidgen off moderate level. So it was a good forecast. But we're doing these forecasts and we don't have any monitoring in Highlands and Islands. So how do we know it's actually moderate in the Highlands and Islands if we're not monitoring? So we need to start thinking about how we change the monitoring networks to better inform us in the future. So just to sum up, like I said, I love measurements, and I think measurements underpin absolutely everything. They identify the issue, we carry out baseline monitoring using measurements, they verify all the modelling we carry out, they inform through modelling and measurements the policy development and implementation, and then we have to use the measurements to track progress. And again, QA/QC the importance of QA/QC can't be understated. We need good quality measurements to be able to do all that. Historically, the Scottish Government objectives have been aligned with the WHO guidelines. And the Scottish Government are starting to look at that now to decide what to do. If they decide to change the guidelines in line with WHO, that has implications on monitoring. So for example, let's say they decided to take on the PM 2.5 annual mean of 5 micrograms. That has huge implications of both how we monitor PM 2.5, because current instrumentation maybe can't measure down to that level, but as well as where we monitor PM 2.5. So we have to review monitoring networks, maybe think about using air quality sensors as part of hybrid system. So sensors could be used for maybe informing the DACI, for example. We need to look at other pollutants, so ammonia for secondary PM 2.5, and governments are looking at that more closely now, and ultrafine particles, because maybe the health impacts of particle number are more important than total mass. And then finally, again, we need to look at how we disseminate the pollution levels using the DACI, and whether we need to align them more closely with the EU and or the WHO guidelines. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions at the end.
Great, thank you very much, Stephen. That's fantastic. And yeah, a prompt again to make sure that everyone drops in their questions into the Q&A function, which I see is populating nicely. So by all means, pop it in there. So you're ahead of the queue. You don't want to be at the end. Robust data so important, isn't it, to what we all do and to informing policy and justifying where we move to with that. Time's against us, so we'll move on quickly to our final speaker for today before we start the Q&A session. Emma Rigler is a principal air quality consultant at Stantec. Emma has a fantastic background in air quality consultancy, spanning various pieces of that: planning, environmental permitting, involving dispersion modelling, touching on the indoor air quality environment, which is great. Most recently, Emma's been acting as the programme manager for the Clean Air Living Matters Exploring Reading as CARMA project for Reading Borough Council, which some of you may already be aware of. If not, please do read up on it and get engaged, because it's fantastic and hopefully something that gets moved wider across the UK. So what I'll do is I'll pass over to Emma without any delay, and yeah, over to you.
Perfect, thanks, Chris. Yeah, hi everyone. So yeah, I'm Emma Rigler, Principal Air Quality Consultant at Stantec, and thought I'd come with a bit of a different perspective today. This webinar's timed quite nicely as we're just finalising our the Clean Air Living Matters programme, with the last delivery happening on Friday. So I can give you an overview of the whole initiative, which is kind of less focused on reducing pollution directly, but more on reducing exposure. So next slide, please. Thank you. So a little bit of background. So yeah, as Chris said, it's Clean Air Living Matters Exploring Reading, sometimes CALM, sometimes CARMA. It was initially a 2-year funded programme by DEFRA. It has slightly extended 2 years now, and it's based out of Reading Borough Council. And it was a collaboration between 5 different companies, DEFRA being the funder, Reading Borough Council being the main recipient of that funding, and then the 3 project partners being the University of Reading, Stantec and Design Nature. And the overall aim of the project was to drive a behavioural change and to deliver air quality education to schools in Reading, and that was both primary and secondary schools, but also the wider community, things like parents, guardians, and anybody really that would listen. And our funding had a particular focus on particulate matter and wood burning and raising awareness of this. So the project quite nicely timed in with the expansion of the Reading smoke control area. So next slide, please. Thought I'd just give a quick overview of the sort of things we've been up to over the last 18 months. So every CALM school receives an indoor and outdoor monitor, and they'll keep those indefinitely. But we also have been using portable monitors, so Atmo tubes, and we would go into the schools and do mapping sessions. So that would typically be mapping the air quality around the school grounds and moving closer to the road, what happens, discussing sources of pollution in the area, and things like that. We also ran a poster competition last autumn, I believe, and that's our winning poster there. And that's been distributed across community centres and GP surgeries and places like that. Some of our most popular sessions have been our laboratory experiments. So we've hosted quite a few schools at the labs in the University of Reading, and we've done experiments that recreate sources of indoor air pollution. So things like smog in a jar, frying some sausages, spraying aerosols, and used indoor air quality monitoring to kind of discuss the impacts of those and ways that they can reduce their exposure to similar pollutants at home. The assemblies, or I think pretty much every CALM school had an assembly at some point over the last 18 months. And then finally, we run 2 years of Clean Air Day workshops where we've brought multiple schools to the university on Clean Air Day and almost done all of our sessions in one. And there was quite a lot of focus on air quality action planning at those sessions as well, and actions that the kids could take home to implement either at home or at school. Perfect, thank you. So yeah, as I mentioned, the CALM programme deliveries have now come to an end. So these are our final numbers, which is quite nice. So over the last 18 months, we managed to do 52 air quality sessions in schools, and that equaled direct engagement with over 9,000 students. And those were in awareness activities. So that would be something like an assembly, and knowledge sessions, which would be the more in-depth workshops. So yeah, we engaged a total of 28 schools, 20 of which were primary schools and 8 were secondary. And we also distributed 120 low-cost air quality sensors. And when all those engagement numbers are tallied up, including parents and guardians and other adults, we're estimated to have reached around 26,000 to 33,000 people in Reading. Perfect, thank you. So this is a little bit of feedback from the students that kind of highlights how keen they were really and how engaged in the programme they were. So on the left, there's an example of one of the air quality action plans. So this one, super easy implementation of opening windows just to improve the ventilation in the classroom. And some of these quotes came out, I believe, from the Clean Air Day workshop. So I'll take air quality more seriously now after everything I've learnt. One student asking for air quality to be in their regular lessons at schools, which is great. Ultimately, we'd love to see air quality in the school curriculum at some point. And the last one, I'm definitely interested in learning more about air quality, and I will do some research and try to educate others around me on air quality. So you can't really ask for more than that. So yeah, it was the students, I think, were a really, really good tool for spreading that word, because they were so engaged. And next slide, please. So yeah, I just wanted to touch on kind of what's next for CALM now. Now the programme is coming to an end. So we've had some feedback from teachers. There were certain schools that were really, really keen and wanted to keep momentum going. So we're actually creating a CALM community of practice. And during inset days in September, we're hoping to do teacher sessions and teach teachers effectively to run their own air quality lessons in the coming years. We've also had lesson plans created as part of this. And there should hopefully be an online forum where teachers can talk to each other, what's working well and what's not. As well as this, we're going to be keeping all of our online resources on the website. So there's word searches, case studies, lesson plans, PowerPoints, all sorts online for anybody to download and access. And ultimately, we're hoping that those air quality action plans and the air quality promises that the children have signed up to will be taken forward, and hopefully we'll hear back from them. So on the left here, that's one example of a school that decided to do an anti-idling campaign as part of their air quality action plan, and it turned into a bit of a poster competition. So I think that's the winner and runner-up there. So yeah, and the last thing I've put there is more funding. So our funding has come to an end, and this moves nicely onto the next slide, because we'd love to build on the air quality programme. And these are kind of similar schemes. I think I would say all but probably SAMI were funded by the DEFRA Air Quality Grant. I believe SAMI was funded by UK Research and Innovation. But yeah, all very similar projects doing very, very good work to raise awareness of air quality. But unfortunately, the DEFRA Air Quality Grant withheld their funding last year for the first time in 27 years. And it's not been reinstated yet. Whether it will be, I think time will tell. But I think these grants are really, really important because they allow local authorities to hone in on their local problems and, cater a project to their needs. And I also think, obviously it's really important to reduce sources of air pollution, but I think it's just as important to educate those and on ways to reduce exposure. So hopefully we'll see the DEFRA grant back at some point in the near future. But yeah, time will tell. I think that's it from me. Yep, I've just left the website there if anybody wants to find out more, and my email. That's it. Happy to take any questions.
That's great. Thank you, Emma, for that. Fantastic to see this in action, and it would be great to expand this out further, and noting that it's all really linked back to funding, isn't it? Right. So awareness around the topic is key, but awareness at all levels really, and hopefully it'll be something that can grow out. We've got quite a few questions populating the Q&A, so if everyone can pop their cameras back on in terms of the presenters and come back on the virtual stage, as it were. What I'll do is I'll attempt to group some of them together, and maybe just pick on one of you, if that's okay, to maybe start answering. And by all means, if there's something that one of the other panelists you feel you also want to raise, by all means, jump in. I'll take them in time order, because it's the most democratic thing to do. So the first question we had was, with the long-term reductions in NO2 and increasing temperatures across the UK, do we think we now need to restart more comprehensive monitoring of ozone and VOCs in urban areas? Max, this one kind of landed during your time on the stage, and I know you mentioned, you know, what we need to do to instigate change, and enforcement was one of them, and what areas we could look at. Is more comprehensive monitoring of different pollutants one of those? What's your take?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think the short answer is yes. It's part of the I suppose overall message of my presentation was that, okay, we've understood the constraints of pollutants and the particular issues that we've had in the last few years quite well now, but what do we do next? And ozone is one to think about. I think it's one of the few pollutants where concentrations are increasing, certainly in urban areas. So yeah, I tend to agree that probably there needs to be a shift in the focus of the perception of those or that pollutant, with, you know, particularly if we are continuing to see increases in temperature as we're expecting. Quite how that's achieved, I think, is a tricky one. There's only a finite amount of space in monitoring stations, for example, so I suspect you may lead more towards the sensor-based monitoring solutions for those types of pollutants, but we'll see. But broadly speaking, yeah, I'd agree with that sentiment.
Goes back to sort of the low-cost sensing piece, doesn't it, as well, potentially helping on that side of things. Okay, well, by all means, if anyone else on the panel wants to step in, but I'll keep moving through the questions, given we've got quite a few. I've grouped a couple of them here. So next one, agriculture is a large source of background PM 2.5 for urban areas. Aside from the example of reduced ammonia by covering slurry tanks, are there any other options available to local government and agri-businesses to reduce these emissions? And I've kind of linked this with question 4 as well, around the chemical mixture of PM particles changing away from carbon, soot and dust to include the microplastics piece, and if there are any known human health and environmental effects of that side of things. And the reason for doing that was to pick on yourself, Srinivas, if you can, if you're okay to step in here and maybe help shed some light on those two.
Sure. No, thanks for this one. That's it's a very important question, I would think. You know, we talked about slurry cooling, slurry acidification. So these are the two big projects RSK had, us have done with DEFRA's help. But a lot of research is being done in various other areas to reduce agricultural emissions. These are like, you know, nutrient management planning. So how you select the type of fertilizer, and then the timing of application, and then, you know, whether you over apply, or, you know, those kind of works were done. So a lot of project reports are available, and awareness in terms of burning of crop residues. So is still a problem. So that really generates a lot of fine particles and then contribute to PM 2.5 and so on. And then livestock management, and how you manage them, where to place them, and how you handle various aspects of this farming. So lots of research is there on ADA's website. I'll be quite happy to provide much more detail, really. You have my email address, so our own work as well as DEFRA's work is available for sharing. And the second one is carbon, soot, and dust. Yeah, so to include in microplastics, and then metals. So particulate matter is a mixture of variety of substances, right? More finer the particles, the more deeper they go into the lung system and so on. Metals, for example, they are known to cause varieties of problems. That's why we focus on lead. Lead is fortunately almost out of the site now. Unleaded petrol is available and so on. So lots of other metals are there, okay, chromium, nickel. So whenever we we monitor, we try to analyze the filter used to collect the particulate matter for various metals. So that's what we regularly do at waste recycling facilities and so on. So as you rightly asked, NEC, the newly emerging economies. So yeah, handling of waste coming from those areas is a big problem. So a lot of probably effort needs to be done on that as well. How you regulate that and how you manage the emissions of metals, I suppose. And then particularly if you are able to monitor, that will give you clear indication of what needs to be done next.
Thank you for that. Yeah, massive questions. We can spend the whole session diving into each of them. If I step back to the previous question in the chat, and Stephen, just to pick this one up because it is to do with measurements and monitoring, and I know you're fascinated with it. It might sound like quite a straightforward question to ourselves. It's our air quality figures averaged out in any way, conscious that big cities will skew results massively, as will rural areas. I know your presentation touched on this, and particularly around with AQ in Scotland website showing it all green, which means there's no problem, is there? That means it's all okay. So so surely averaging it all out, that makes it all fine as well, doesn't it? That means everything's okay.
Yeah, so I should have explained my charts more or better. I took the top 3 sites in my own 2 charts in terms of concentrations to look at the trend. If you're looking at trends, it's okay to average out. In general, maybe by site types, maybe better. You can split the data up however you want. But if this was to do with my presentation, they weren't averaged out for my analysis.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, people can probe on it in any way, like you said.
Yeah.
I mean, they're averaged. They can be averaged out compared in terms of limits, compared against annual averages and various different time periods. So obviously we have to compare pieces. But again, if we're talking about people's doses, right, of air pollution, discrete events like you mentioned about construction sites adjacent to wherever it is, you can have a spike in pollution that might be quite sizable, and whether or not that's picked up as part of an averaging process or a green dot on a map is another thing, isn't it? So the devil's in the detail, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's comparing to objectives, you're doing it site by site, so you're never averaging out across networks.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So next question is, what do you think are the top 3 interventions that help improve outdoor and indoor air quality, but also have the most co-benefits in terms of climate change and public health? Happy to sort of throw this to the floor, but picking on yourself, Em, because it was again with a bit of a schools focus, maybe what your take from that was, and it might just be taking the lens off of it being particularly school related, and then happy for anyone else to jump in as well to open up the discussion if you're okay to get the ball rolling on that one.
Yeah, we actually found that a lot of the people's automatically linked air quality to climate change and wanted to speak about both. So we did slightly cover climate change too. And I think the main things that we were discussing were, increasing sustainable travel, active travel that benefits air quality and climate change at the same time. And also reducing reliance on fossil fuels, if that's like, a car, but also wood burning inside home and central heating with gas, anything basically with the required fossil fuels. We discussed that, and I think the final thing that I picked up was just the education piece, because we actually interviewed quite a few parents outside school gates, and 48%, I think it was, the people said they just didn't care about air quality at all, which was much higher than I'd anticipated. And I think it was something like 80% had never heard of the smoke control area. So I think the main thing is, increasing that education so people are informed about the actions that they can take, and every little action adds up.
Yeah, thank you. Has anyone else got any other thoughts on this one in terms of co-benefits? We can have our cake and eat it, maybe. Would be nice.
Just to add to that, as from a consultant's perspective, I think it's incumbent on us to try and push that message as well. I mean, certainly in my experience, there's been a tendency to kind of disconnect the two when you're talking to, be that clients or regulators or whoever. But in the public consciousness, certainly, you know, the two are intrinsically linked. So I think perhaps the industry needs to start to think about that a little bit more, and it's something we're trying to do at AECOM, is to tie the two together and think more in a sort of nature-based solution type way on the projects that we're doing. So I guess, you know, that is an easier thing to communicate to people perhaps that aren't familiar with air quality, is that it's all the same stuff, just in different contexts mainly.
That's a great point.
Just to add one more thing, you know, if you're talking about public health as well as climate change, probably ammonia is the key one, because ammonia is, you know, creates adverse health effects, and also ammonia creates particles, fine particles, and so on. Ammonium sulfate, ammonium nitrate, and they find PM2.5 are, you know, this major proportion is from them. So a lot of emphasis should be done, you know, to reduce those emissions, I suppose. And also, as we have seen, clean range zones, they created good impact. So probably that should be extended, and so on. And then public awareness, as you rightly said, Emma and Max, you know, that are key as well.
Thank you. Yeah, communication, awareness, behavioural change are definitely words I'm spotting a lot more in generally cutting across the board, really, and it's shifting us from a certainly we need to have the robust data and be scientifically thorough, but we need to also be able to communicate that in an effective way. And Emma, your stats around how many people cared, or how many parents cared at the school gate about air quality, scale that up to society's level. The whole of the UK, yeah, shows the challenge we have, right? I'm conscious there are a couple of the questions left in the chat, but I'm also conscious we have 2 minutes left. So I'd like to draw things to a little bit of a close now, and obviously I'm sure the panelists will be happy to come back on those questions and maybe provide their responses to them, just to make sure we do give an answer to Linda, yourself, and someone else has raised a question there as well. So I'd just like to say, as we close up, thank you to all our speakers today. Absolutely fascinating, and as ever, not enough time to cover everything that we want to. And thank you to Waterfront Conference for bringing together us together in this space to discuss such an important topic. And hopefully, don't want to talk out of turn, hopefully this is part of a series where we'll move forward and have more conversations together. And thank you to everyone who's joined as well, either today or also watching this at a later date. I'm sure we'd all be happy to follow up outside of this room. Yeah, and with that, I'd just like to say enjoy your day, and yeah, thank you again. Bye all.
Thank you very much.